Okay. Stace, you want to take it away?
Yeah. I got a character voice for this one. Okay. Picture me as a large bearded man. If there's a show about... Okay, wait. Let me try this again. If there's a show about a showrunner's work, it's called the Showrunner Show. Runner, 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 run. If there's a show about a showrunner's work, it's called the Showrunner Show. Runner, runner. Wait, my son's watching me in horror. Yeah, you can shower. Go ahead. This is an episode of that self-same Showrunner Show. If there's a show about a showrunner's work, it's called the Showrunner Show. Best practices episode. That had a lot. That had layers.
That was really good.
Yeah, you brought a lot to that. Welcome to the Showrunner Show, where every week we demystify some aspect of the job of showrunning for anyone who works in TV, who wants to work in TV, or just wants to know how it's all made. Today we're trying something a little different. We're going to call this series our kind of Best Practices series. These are tips or tricks we've used on our shows that have, we've found transformative in our shows. Feel free to use these tricks on your show too.
We sort of found that as we've been doing these episodes, it becomes this far-ranging tangential conversation, which sometimes is really fun. But sometimes we're like, oh my God, let's just make a point. We'll just talk about that point and get out. So we're kind of doing that. It's going to be fun.
Yeah. And we'd like to discuss, something we've implemented on our shows that we like to call the no sides on set rule. And I put rule in like air quotes because it's as much of a suggestion as a rule on our shows. But let's
define sets for the uninitiated listener.
Yeah, what are sides?
Yeah, you want to take it, Drew?
Yeah. Sides are basically a printout of the script pages of that day. So whatever you're shooting that day, the AD department will hand out, a stapled, stack of pages that are being shot that day. And they're usually shrunken to kind of be the size that you can just slip in your back pocket. And, it's very helpful for the crew and everyone, to kind of stay on the same page and just remind themselves of what they're shooting. And it's helpful to go back and read a scene and see, okay, do I have all the props that I need for the scene? Do we have, it's very helpful for the crew. I think when it comes to cast, it can be a little bit of a crutch when I think if they haven't perfectly memorized their lines and they can just pull them out of their back pocket between takes and look at them all the time. That's kind of what we're addressing here is the sides for actors in particular.
No sides for actors. Yeah, so a script is going to be about, 60 pages long, something like that. And if you're block shooting, you've got two of those, right? So that's like 120 pages, but you're not going to lug that around with you. You're not going to pull that out of your back pocket. So that's why they make the little sides. So you can go, we're just going to do these 3 scenes today. They look like this. And, some actors, day players who get nervous, or maybe stars who just showed up at sunset, on location the night before or whatever, or maybe feeling a little overwhelmed or lazy, they might lean heavily on those sides and, pull them out of their pockets, take a little peek at them even right before the cameras roll. And, that's how people often do it. But the no sides on set rule takes care of that, gets rid of that option.
Yeah. And it kind of forces, in a way, or it forces the issue of I'll sort of backtrack. I'll backtrack to the kind of the origin of this for us was on Waco that season, our first day working with Mike Shannon, to consolidate the schedule and stuff. They scheduled him a 9-page day his first day on set. And
that's a lot of pages to shoot.
That's like a tenth of a Broadway play.
Yeah.
And you're doing that day one with people you don't know.
I mean, 9 pages is a lot to shoot for the whole production for one day. That's a big day, despite it, not to mention one actor doing all 9 of those pages is crazy.
And that I feel like I keep jumping in, but just the other thing is with a Broadway play or something like that, you're memorizing, you're taking months to memorize it. You memorize the whole thing. With TV, it's like you memorize 9 pages, you do it in one day, and then you're just supposed to get rid of it. That's out of your mind, and then you're going to fill that blank mind the next day with 5 more pages. Or, you learn it all, and you let it go in one day, which is bananas. But okay, Go ahead, John.
But so Mike Shannon, this is Drew and my first day working with Mike, and we were so excited and a little nervous, and he shows up and he doesn't have a script on him. He has memorized all 9 pages to a point that he doesn't even need a reference. He needs no help. And then Shea Wiggum shows up and he's memorized all of his scenes, like doesn't need any reference. And we started to see this pattern where the pros know how to prepare. The pros know, they show up just locked and loaded, ready to gun. And then, Mike, halfway through the day, he had one scene with a kind of a local, day player who we had planned to have a whole season arc. And the guy showed up and he kind of half knew his lines, and he was burying, his sides under the papers on his desk and then pulling them out between takes. And, Mike Shannon was cool about it. Like he's a pro. He knows how things go sometimes. And he wasn't angry about it or anything, but just to see the difference in somebody of Mike's caliber, who's not just, more experienced, but has so vastly out-prepared the actor. And I think a lot of actors have this idea of their job is to get cast. Their job, they bring their best for the audition. But in an audition, maybe 3 people will see it. You know what I mean? Maybe 5. But it's then they get cast and they go to actually do the job, and they've already won, in their minds, they've already won. They already did it.
This is just a celebration now. Yeah.
Yeah. Totally. Now
they already
just
called
here.
their mom and was like, I got the job. Now they're just going through the motions of,
Yeah, totally. And you see the pros, the people who've been doing it, show up ready to rock and roll. And the newer people, the people who are, you'd think it'd be the opposite. You think it'd be the new people are super gung ho, oh my God, I gotta.
Yeah, I'm gonna impress everybody. Yeah.
I have a couple things to say about that. The first is, I think, and this is, speaking with a lot of heart for the day players. A day player is, somebody who comes in to act just for one day, right?
100%.
They often, and I was a day player for a long time, they often don't work that much. So they just don't realize, basically they show up and they have a lot of nerves. And even if they're like, I spent 3 hours yesterday saying my 4 sentences that I have to do in the scene over and over and over. I am so prepared. I've never been so prepared. Then they show up, they get flooded with adrenaline and nerves, and it all goes away. I can't tell you, as a covering writer, I feel bad to how often I've seen somebody who shows up, they're chatty, everything's fine. And then as the cameras go, you see this look of terror in their eyes. And I've honestly heard many actors be they flub their lines and then somebody else cut. And they're like, I know this. I know this. I know this perfectly. And you're like, who doesn't have to say that is the person who knows it perfectly. It's just because of nerves, right? Yeah. The other thing I want to tack on for this is, John, I think you're so right that actors go, I got the job. It's something that only happens to me once a year or once every 2 years. I did it. And they forget they actually have to show up and shoot it. And so many actors, I think they think their job is to look as good as possible and to be as emotionally centered as possible when they show up. So they'll go get facials, they'll drink celery juice, they'll get a lot of sleep. They'll do all this stuff to sort of put themselves into a more glowy, beautiful physical place and a more centered mindset of, life coachy type stuff. And they forget that really all they have to do is say those lines. Saying those lines, memorizing those lines kind of becomes the last thing on their mind. They're caring way more about exfoliating their skin than learning the lines there.
Yeah, no, I believe that's true. I believe a lot of actors freeze. And I think it's important to have, like John said, it's not a hard and fast rule. I think it's important to recognize if someone's, having those nerves and they need to take a look at, you call a little timeout, let them kind of refamiliarize themselves with the lines. I think that's helpful to have that, still available to actors. But yeah, I think, as you're saying, John, you think of Michael Shannon as just this supremely talented actor, and it just comes easy for him, and Shea Wiggum, and and the same was true for Taylor Kitsch. His first day on Waco was coming in to do a huge monologue for the joy sermon the scene we called the joy sermon.
That was his first day.
That was his first day,
wow.
And you could have printed take 1 and not even done a second take, and it would have been great. I mean, you just see this kind of we see this recurring pattern of these guys that are really successful and really, continue to work like crazy are also the ones that work the hardest. And that's no coincidence.
Yeah. Like Taylor's current show, I know, he did a season 1 of his show and he showed up prepared and just gunning so hard. They gave him a whole spinoff to just him, you know what I mean? And I think so often it's as showrunners and writers on set, like we see who is prepared, and often the people like, oh, I know the lines, like it's just nerves. But you know what I feel like calms actors more than anything else is really knowing the lines.
Yeah.
In a point, like Taylor Kitsch, for example, his Joy Sermon, like he brought a friend to Santa Fe when we were shooting, and he would spend all his off time running lines with that friend over and over. He trained, like, Taylor came up as a, semi-pro hockey player before he was an actor. And he trained like an athlete trains. He did reps and reps and reps. So by the time he was actually, doing the Joy Sermon, he knew that so well. Like there was no question. He didn't have to reach for a single line where, you see the actors who do show up with sides on set. Often it's the network asks you to trim those scenes. Like you see it in slow motion. You see it coming. You're like, oh, this actor is struggling. The network is going to see the dailies and see the actor struggling. You know what I mean? Like, and slowly all these lines are going to get trimmed down, and it's going to be the bare bones of what the scene could be. And then the crew starts working faster. Like, oh, most of the scene's going to get cut. Let's just move through it. It has this cumulative effect when people don't know their lines. And I feel like it doesn't serve the actors well, if they're struggling, if they're going back and, and you always have a script supervisor on set. You usually have a writer on set, and you have the script supervisor. So you can always go to them and ask, like, hey, did I get that line right? Like you can always double check that way. And that's totally a different thing.
And also no sides on set. It's like, that's on set. You can have it in your trailer. You can have it in your green room or whatever. You'll be taking peeks at it. It's just, you can't be there glancing at it in your back pocket right before they say action. That's all. What would you say some of the benefits are? What are some of the benefits that you've noticed? Better performances?
I would say, performances for sure. But I would say it's just a huge time saver in terms of production. It's like, you have number 30 on your call sheet shows up and doesn't know their lines, and you're doing, 9 takes. It's like a rainstorm just came into the middle of your day, and it just grinds everything to a halt. The whole day loses its momentum, and performances across the board really suffer. And like John said, you start to get like, okay, how are we going to save the scene? Like what's the truncated version of the scene that will exist after this situation, So I think it's just really destructive in so many ways.
Yeah. I also think it forces the director, the showrunners, the writers on set, and the other actors to play traffic cop instead of playing like, what's the best version of the scene? How do we find the great nuance that, could exist in the scene? Instead of playing that game, you're playing, hey, did that actor say this line yet? Did they get this line right yet? Like, we need this line for something down the road.
Oh, you're saying like if people don't know their lines.
If people don't know their lines, then it forces everyone around them to play the game of like, did they say the line yet? Versus, okay, everyone's locked and loaded. And take one is a printable take. Take one is something like, then you have two actors just playing with nuance. And it's like, that's the stuff actors want to do. That's the stuff we all want to do, is to get into the meat of the scenes versus playing the, did the actor say the line yet? Game.
As a covering writer, one of the benefits I've noticed is that if people can't have sides, if the actors can't have sides, if they want to change something or they don't like something, if they have like, hey, can I do an improv here? Or I'm bumping on this, I don't like this. They come to you early. Like, John, we were discussing earlier, not everyone does this, but a typical thing, something that you fellas do consistently and a lot of other people do, is the actors get together, they rehearse, they block. This is before they've had all their makeup and stuff.
With the director. Then the
crew is brought in, the DP, everyone's brought in to watch their blocking. And they just sort of stand around in a circle and watch them do it. And then the actors are sent away to get their hair and their makeup and their wardrobe and all that, while the technicians, set up the lights and do all. And that might take, half an hour or something. I've noticed that if people can have sides, they might not bother to ask you about changing a line or doing something differently until they're just about to shoot. They go away, they get their makeup, they get their hair, they come back, and then as it's action, they go, I feel like maybe this line, I don't love it so much, or I don't know if a lawyer would really say this, whatever. Whereas if they're not going to be able to have that, those discussions will probably happen I mean, even before rehearsal. Do you know what I mean? You're showing up and you're standing in line. I was always late because I'm the worst. So standing in line to gobble down breakfast. And then people are coming to me with, like, hey, can this line change or can that line change? And since I wasn't the showrunner, that also gave me an opportunity. They might ask about lines and stuff and I could give my opinion, but I would always have to call you guys and run it past you. I could say, I think that's a good choice, blah, blah. Let me check with John and Drew. That would give me a moment to call the showrunner, get the go-ahead, the approval or the disapproval, something that would be extremely time-consuming if it were happening with the full crew there.
Yeah, that's true. Anything that any conversation you can pull up, before the day, before you're actually shooting is so helpful because it's true. Even one line change suggestion from an actor that maybe as a showrunner you don't like and you want to explain to them why what's written is better, like those conversations, can take a half hour. They really can take a long time. And actors, sometimes have really thought about a line and really feel strongly about changing something. And it could take a long time to kind of get around that or to agree to the, to the line change. But those are typically not short conversations. So anything that can kind of come up ahead of the shooting day will save, not just that time, but anything that delays your shooting has a ripple effect. I think you were saying, John, that cumulative effect. And, everything seems to slow down when one thing slows you down. And so any of those things you can move off your shooting day is you'll thank yourself for later.
I think there's a vibe too when your production is running efficiently and things are moving quickly. It gets the crew excited and the actors feed off the crew. And, the actors are all, they can feel the energy around them. If it's a bunch of people like checking texts, in their eyeline, you know what I mean? Like, and actors or crew will check out if they're like, oh, nobody knows their lines. It's going to be 2 hours before we shoot anything. Then they slow down, and then there's even more time. Like it all feeds itself. Whereas if actors show up and they're ready to gun, that camera operator better know exactly where he's going to go in the rehearsal. You know what I mean? He doesn't have 3 takes to find it. Like he's got to know it. Take one, and the boom guy has to know exactly where he's going and how to dance with it, like, because there's not going to be takes to waste. And I think that just imbues the entire crew with this feeling of excitement and momentum that translates, onto your finished product, your finished scene. Like you feel the energy in the room, good or bad. Deep down, like you can feel it. Like if everyone's miserable, you can feel that. And if everyone's moving at a good clip, you can feel that too. It's why, so often, like, my favorite directors, like they get bigger and bigger budgets and have more and more time and their movies get like boring. You know what I mean? Whereas like when they had to like rush and gun and show up enthusiastic and excited, those are, tend to be, I feel like, people's best work.
We kind of had fun with this new rule too that we developed. And I think, you definitely have to have buy-in from your lead. You have to go to your lead and say, this is, something I'm going to do for the rest of the cast. And typically your lead is, already there and already kind of, like using the Mike Shannon example, already is a person that you never see pull out sides ever. But it's really kind of, if you can kind of pose it as a challenge a little bit of like, hey, this is, a rule on our sets that we don't want to see sides on set. And you'll be acting with Mike and you'll never see him pull out his sides. And, and if you kind of just set that bar ahead of time, I think most people take it as a bit of a fun challenge. And I think that's a way to kind of position it versus kind of taking a crutch away from them or taking something away from them that's useful for them. I think that most people responded that way, where it's kind of like, oh, really? Okay. It's like that, and that's kind of a good way to position it, I think.
Having come up from theater, rather than film, theater is filled with this sense, like every day begins with a little speech of like, we're in this together, we're doing this together. There's so much rehearsal. There's so much talking about the script. There's so much talking with the director of like, what are we making here? When I switched to film and TV and I, as an actor, showed up on set, it was a shock to me, a huge shock to see just how scattered the whole thing is. You don't even know who you're working with. There are hundreds of people. I have to say the No Sides on Set creates that feeling of that sort of theater feeling of we're all in this together. Yeah. We're all making the same thing. The crew is here. The actors are here. The directors, we've all discussed this ahead of time. We are making the same, we're all in this together.
Yeah, that's true. That's really good.
To Drew's point too, like to make it, we like to create the, like, we've learned to, instead of trying to tell actors as they show up, because then it's too late. Like, we've set it up where we talk to the production coordinator to send out a memo. When someone's cast, they get this memo saying like, hey, just so you know, here's what our expectation is, that you will not bring your, script to set. We like to, the leads like to move fast. We like to support them in that and not slow things down by people finding it on set. And just them having, and we make it, kind of an expectation mentioned versus a rule. If someone shows up and they're struggling, you know what I mean, then it doesn't become like, we said, this thing, like we and we had actors like, hey, I was just cast at the last minute. Like it's a lot of scenes. Like, we've had people come to us, but it's not just they show up not knowing it. They show up feeling like, oh, like I'm still working on it. It just creates a different level, different bar, a different level of professionalism that I think just stating that expectation instead of being like, oh my God, I can't believe this person doesn't know their lines, just laying that out ahead of time, I think allows people who are just there for one day to know how to prepare like a pro. You know what I mean? Just that one thing. Like, you know what the pros do? They all show up like locked and loaded. There's a reason pros are pros, and half of it is just they know how to like know their lines, and they practice and they rehearse, and they're scared to show up and be the one person who doesn't know their lines. And
I didn't realize you did that through the production coordinator. I thought you did that through the casting director. So it's not like hey, congratulations, here's your phone call, you've been cast, no sides on set. It's more like the production coordinator sends out the like, hey, be here at this time. These are the scenes we're doing. Please, no sides on set. It's like that.
Yeah, it's almost like a cast memo that's sent out as a separate thing that, but like once you're cast at some point in the process, like we talk to the producer and the production coordinator to make sure they all get this one same memo. We write it out. We write it in a way that's not like, jerky or,
Yeah.
Demanding.
Like you were saying, an invitation and a goal rather than a law, like you will be humiliated.
Yeah, and I think it sends the message. Yeah, it's not sent out as a kind of a jerky way. I think it also sends a message of this show's going to move fast. You're not going to be sitting around waiting. No, we're going to. I think it sets the stage for a well-run machine, and I think all actors, ultimately appreciate that too. And it really works. It really works.
It does. It does. It's been transformative on our sets. I think. So that's our best practices, no sides on set rule. Please send us a message. Tell us if you like these best practice episodes, and please hit subscribe. And if you like our show, please consider rating us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.